can wait for it.
Where's the intro F1 anthem?
That's going to come up. Hey,
It's
Amar,
gonna come.
how are you?
I am good. How are you?
Usual.
Actually, I'm not good, but yeah,
Yeah, why?
I'm
Why?
here.
Why? Why are you not good? What's going
I
on?
mean, look at the topic you picked, man. I mean, like, there's nothing optimistic ever nowadays. So, I'm done with hopium. I'm done with copium. Like, I don't know what stage of grief is this? Like, this is where I've
Okay,
just
well,
given up.
if you guys are joining us at this ungodly hour,
What?
it is what 5 o'clock for you in LA, is it?
It is, but the rest of the world is awake, alive, and kicking. So, why not?
I mean, this is what I always ask. Why not? I mean, that's what we're here for, right? So I've woken you up at 5 in the morning, Amar, to talk all things Ferrari and why they are just absolutely crashing and burning at the moment. But before I talk about them crashing and burning, do you agree with that characterization? Do you think they are in fact crashing and burning, or am I just being harsh for no reason?
I don't think you're being harsh. I mean, I think one of the things that is reflective of this season is that there was a point in somewhere around Fred Vasseur's contract renewal slash firing time that there was a prevailing theory that Ferrari get criticized too much because of who they are, what they mean to the sport, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think if you look back at the season, Ferrari have not been criticized nearly enough as they should have been. But I also think there's a little bit of lack of discipline when it comes to being critical because with Ferrari, it's always like fire this guy, fire that guy, hire this guy, fire that guy, right? Like that's sort of been the criticism, and I think we have to stop just one step short of that and actually be critical of what they've done because I would argue that they're
Yes,
probably
I
having this sort
I,
of
I
the
love
worst
I love
way of
critical.
doing this, So,
I love
yeah, I
being
don't. I
critical,
mean,
Amar. This is what gets me up in the morning, not at 5 o'clock in the morning, but it certainly gets me up in the morning. So
I mean,
so we should do that because I think especially this week since Singapore happened, there's been a little bit of soul searching, or at least there have been reports in the Italian media, and I have to say reports in the Italian media because none of this is ever actually
right.
corroborated. Uh, but that the big wigs at Ferrari and Fiat, Benedetto Vigna and John Elkann, have met for crisis talks. What
Oh,
happens next?
wow.
John Alcan's come out and said we must win. We owe it to my friends, my family, Italy, the world. We have to win. But we have been here so many times before. It's just an ongoing circle of doom, gloom, and underperformance. That is Ferrari, and they always do the same thing, where the answer to underperformance is let's fire some people and bring in some new people, and hope that new person suddenly does better immediately. And if they don't, they're out again, and it's just a constant revolving door. And one of the things that I think we continue to say on this channel is that a Formula One team is never going to be successful if there is a huge amount of top down interference
Turnover.
from management on the day-to-day running of a Formula One team, which in and of itself is a specialist entity. It's not like running a car manufacturer, for for customers. It's not a clothing brand. It's not any other kind of business. It's a specialist sports team that requires specialist thinking, and that means that unless you know how this works, how it runs, you're steeped in experience and expertise of it. If you're meddling, you're messing it up.
Shaz, I would just push back on what you said there. Every example you gave of every other company or organization that does different kinds of work, it still applies there. If you have a heavy amount of top-down interference that results in turnover, lack of trust, motivation, etc., you're not going to be able to sell t-shirts or cars or win on track. I mean, there's one thing that is really good about the way Mercedes has gone about the last decade or so is that they have functioned, I would argue, as much as a corporate entity as anyone else, in that they have principles, they have processes, they have things that work, even when the results have not always been, winning, or let's just say even having bad results, right? So the process is there. Ferrari has just not had that for the last,
Yeah.
now 2 decades, if you will. And so that's just showing, and this is all the latest example in that. So I think you're right. We've always said this, right? One thing I do want to clear before we kind of get into a lot of the details of it, because stuff we're going to say is probably going to offend a lot of people, but I think you and I are
Really?
both on
Oh,
the
I
same
love
page. Yeah, I
offensive.
think you're I think you and I are both on the same page, and that we're not calling for Fred Vasseur to be fired. In fact, I'd argue it's got to be the opposite of that,
Agree.
right?
Agree.
Number two, I would not put any of the this season's failures on Lewis Hamilton, because he just joined the team, and so, even when we talk about what he did in China, nothing is there to take anything away from him, and even his struggles throughout the season. This is not on him. And third, and more importantly, this is not on Charles Leclerc. I mean, this is the only mistake that Charles Leclerc has made, is that he loves Ferrari too much as some of us in Tifosi world, and he's behaving like a fan, maybe more so than a driver. But it comes from a good place, and therefore, I do not want these three cast of characters to be blamed for anything that's going. In fact, they all need a hug and help, and maybe some beverages.
Yeah, I mean, so my point about corporations and stuff is more just your expertise in running any other kind of business isn't necessarily relevant
Fair enough.
to running a Formula One team, and I think
Hmm.
that's been borne out across generations. Not just at Ferrari, but you look at Honda, and you look at Toyota. Both of those teams,
Hmm.
and it's interesting they both come from Japan, because I think the Japanese very traditionally, culturally, have a
Hmm.
way of working, and they've wanted to impose that on a Formula One team, and it meant that Toyota specifically, um, they wanted to run the Formula One team in the way that they ran their very very successful car business, but
Hmm.
the time frames and the processes that are successful in a manufacturing business, in a car manufacturing business, are not the same as they are in a Formula One business, and it played out. They never won a race, for the entirety of their tenure in Formula One, and Ferrari are in danger of doing that. Well, what I wanted to do was, rather than playing the blame game, which is what I feel John Elkann and Benedetto Vigna will do. They'll give a time that you must get a podium or a win by this
What?
time. Rather than doing that, Ammar, I thought we would look at the three aspects that make up a successful Formula One team. So the three headings I always look at are technical. Oh, you can't see my fingers. Technical, operational, and strategy. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, and I think of those three, the most important in terms of getting a successful outcome to your season is the technical side. If you don't have a fast car, you're not gonna do well. Um, so to that end, I thought we'd talk about Ferrari's technical nous, and how they're doing in terms of the outright performance of their challenger, the SF25, in this season. Um, I'm going to give you a little bit of context. So, we've talked a huge amount about Ferrari choosing to pursue not a completely different concept, but changing 90% of the car, moving to a pull rod front suspension when they had a push rod last year, um, but maintaining their old pull rod rear suspension, and Loic Serra having to essentially explain why they were changing the car despite having nothing to do with it, because Loic Serra came on and had nothing to do with the car that is currently challenging for the 2025. I want to say title, but they're not really challenging for anything this season, are they?
What kind of title are we talking about? Like P4,
Your
P5?
your Lyco title. If everybody had to just lift and coast, Ferrari would be the winners. Um, yeah. So first of all, let's have a look at some numbers. So how good or bad have Ferrari actually been in terms of pure performance? I've got a graph, and you know how much I love a super time. I've got a huge amount of them. So if we look at the top four teams across the entirety of the season so far. So from Australia to Singapore. A super time, if you haven't watched us before or don't know what it is essentially the fastest time that your car achieves expressed as a percentage of the fastest time for any car of that weekend. So, for example, if your car was on pole position, you would get 0. But if if you're away from that, or if you're slower than that, then you would get a percentage above that. So the bigger the number, the worse your performance is, right? Now on this graph, I've inverted it just to make it a bit more obvious who's fast and who's slow. But essentially what you can see is that McLaren have been the quickest across the entirety of the season, right? They've been the closest to 0 the whole season. They've taken a bit of a drop over the last 2 or 3 races since Zandvoort, but in essence, they've been the quickest team. The other teams have kind of been up and down, but you can also see that Red Bull have been pretty close to that optimal 0 line. They've been pretty close to McLaren for a lot of the season. Mercedes have taken some notable dips, especially in Monaco, Austria, and the Belgian sprint, although in Belgium proper they got a bit better. But again, actually their peaks have been much higher. Look at the first half of the season up until Imola. Actually, they've been pretty good, and they're back on an upward trajectory from Zandvoort onwards. But then you look at Ferrari. So Ferrari have kind of been nowhere near, right? They've had the China sprint pole, but other than that China sprint pole, you can see that they've never really been close to really challenging for the top spots, right? And actually every time you think that they're starting to improve, they just take another dip again. There's no upward trajectory at any point in the season to their performance. And you compare that to last season, and last season they actually spent a lot of the time right at the top of the graph with 2 major dips in the middle of the season, but they managed to get that back again. There just doesn't seem to be any light at the end of the tunnel for this car, no matter what the team bring. They had the big update, what was it, after
It's Spa, right?
Spa? Yeah, they had the big update in Spa.
Well, it was technically Monaco, right? But then, yeah. Well,
but
okay.
with the rear
Yes.
suspension, and it was hailed as this is what we need, a more stable mechanical platform. It will mean that we have more leeway in our ride height, which has been the Achilles heel of this car throughout this season, especially since China. But it hasn't really done anything. The drivers are still complaining about the car. Charles Leclerc was trying crazy setup experiments in Singapore, which made 0 difference. So the question has to be asked, Ammar. 2 questions, really. The first is, was it a mistake to change 90% of the car? And second, do they have the technical team in place at the moment to be able to rectify that? Is it rectifiable?
The first question is hard to answer, right? Because I think in the past I've argued with you that they should have never changed what the SF24 had brought, at least towards the end of last season, because they were very competitive after they had fixed whatever the issues were. I mean, they had a dip in Spain and then kind of came back towards the the latter part of the season. My instinct was that they would improve upon what they had in front of them, because this was the last year of this rule set. And yes, there's going to be a lot that carries over, but it seemed like they had found the magic formula, and they were winning races. I mean, if you think back to, I mean, it was this time last year that they won in Austin, and then they won in Mexico, and they were almost there. Even in Abu Dhabi, where Lando was a little bit ahead, they were not that far off in that race, right? So My sense is that they could have improved the car. Now, I think this is a matter of verbiage, right? How much do you improve? What do you improve? Where do you improve? I mean, those are all kinds of things that, technical minds would have a better sense of. So I think your second question, in my opinion, is more pertinent because in deciding to change the philosophy of the car so drastically in this last year, I can think of only one possible reason why they did that is they said, okay, this is the yet another iteration of what a ground effect car would look like. Let's try it and see what happens. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, then we are where we are. I mean, in my mind, that's the calculation they made at the top end of it, like the philosophical calculation. I don't know if they have the technical expertise, the engineering expertise to do that. I mean, I think the risk in being critical about the engineers in particular is that I think it ends up being either they're amazing or they need to be canned, and I think I think there are many exits in between, right? You can be critical without firing somebody. I don't know that they have that, Chess, because we have learned that Ferrari's had a hard time recruiting technical staff because of their sort of location challenges, geographical challenges, their inability to think flexibly outside the box in terms of where people can be placed. There are other issues at play, so I'm not sure it's fully fair to say that they do not have the technical staff. It might just be that they do. And there's also been changes, right? Loic Serra just started, right? And he needs some time, and that needs some time to sort of show itself too. So again, in my opinion, I sort of go back to saying, okay, if that was the case, why not just work on, trying to make SF24 a little bit better, work on trying to, cool the tires or tire management and those kind of things maybe, which I know McLaren came back more aggressive with their development too, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, what is
So
the
so
depth of
so so
changes that have happened,
So
right?
Amar,
So
I'd argue that in between your praising everybody and sacking everybody, there's a place in the middle where all
mhm.
Formula One teams land, right? And that's process. It's process and data analysis. It's boring to talk about because it's not about like you know
It's not
it's
overtaking
not
getting faster than
overtaking
one. Yeah, yeah,
exactly
yep.
right and driving technique. It's not about that. But every Formula One team has hard points of data that come from their wind tunnel, that comes from CFD, and it used to be when you had unlimited track testing, you had data that came from the track, but they don't have that anymore. So
Mm.
there's a an issue here of correlation between what you see in your simulations in the wind tunnel, on your driver in loop simulator, on the CFD, versus what you see on the track. And my my problem with Ferrari is that I often find that when they are performing well, it's not that they necessarily understand why they're performing well. It's a problem that Mercedes have had for the entirety of this rule set, but they haven't gone about trying to make massive wholesale changes every couple of seasons, which is what Ferrari look like they have done. Um, and I have defended Ferrari um, quite hard actually for making that change because they said, look, we have reached the development potential of the SF24. We needed to make a change to be able to have better development potential for this car. And I understand that because it's what McLaren did as well. McLaren made pretty big changes to the mechanical platform of their car for 2025. And I think if Ferrari hadn't done what they did and just stuck with SF24, I don't think they'd be any worse off, but I don't think they'd be any better off either. And we'd be complaining that, oh, why didn't they develop their car in the off season? And I think that
Fair.
I think we would just have a different argument. But where I can criticise Ferrari and where I think the problem lies is not in the personnel. It's not in the the data that's coming from the wind tunnel and the CFD necessarily, but it might be. It's to do with how that data is used. And I come back to that word correlation. How well does the data that you see in the wind tunnel, because they said, look, we got improvements um, from our wind tunnel data by when we introduced this new rear suspension, we got a decent chunk of lap time out of it. It's just it's never translated into actual lap time for the drivers on track in real life. That's correlation. That lap time from wind tunnel to CFD hasn't translated to what has happened on track. Whereas McLaren, they saw an upshift in lap time based on their simulations at the beginning of the season or in the off season, and they saw a similar improvement in lap time on the actual track. And that, I think, is what McLaren's main advantage is. It's their process, it's their structure, it's the way they use their data that means that there's a high correlation between what they see in their simulation tools and what they see on track. And it's why every time they bring an upgrade to their car, it has a tangible effect on lap time. Whereas Ferrari turn up with an upgrade, nothing happens. And it's been the same, for Mercedes as well. But Mercedes have kind of just stuck with the same thing and just sort of gone, okay, we'll just do the best with what we can, with what we have right now. And we're not talking about them anyway. But in terms of Ferrari themselves, there's clearly a process issue. And it always, in Formula One, comes down to process. It's not about individual people. So sacking individual people doesn't make any difference unless you change the processes that you are using to analyze the data that you have from your simulation tools and make them more relevant, correlate better with what is happening on track. And that, for me, is the challenge that Loic Serra and the rest of the technical team at Ferrari have to face. And I'm going to reiterate again, that's not going to get better if you sack Loic Serra or if you sack Fred Vasseur. It's about a change in how they use their data.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, right? And again, this is true no matter what you're doing, whether you're racing cars or you're selling cars, right? You keep changing people, that has an impact. We're not at that point with AI yet where you can just plug and play people and then just things will work as is, right? So I think one of the things that is the envy of Ferrari fans when they look at teams like Mercedes or Red Bull or even McLaren now, right, is that they have a set of processes that more likely than not give you the positive outcomes you need, right? I mean, even look at Red Bull, Shez. One of the reasons why it is so painful now to see where Max is at is, of course, he's great. But let's just be honest too. I mean, Red Bull are doing some things right behind the scenes in making their car the best it can be. And so there's something to be said about that, even when Christian Horner is gone, right? So there's something to be said about what they've said, even when Adrian Newey is not there, right? So I think there's a page to be borrowed in terms of how other teams do business in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say Red Bull are actually a very good example of this. Since Laurent Mekies has turned up, they've continued to develop the 2025 car. And you might think, well, why would you bother continuing to develop this 2025 car when there's almost zero chance that you're going to win the drivers? And there's now obviously no chance that they're going to win the constructors. Especially when we've got a massive rule change coming up, because you're going to affect your development for the 2026 rules. And Laurent Mekies, in an interview just after the Singapore Grand Prix, basically turned around and said, yes, that's a risk that we hamper the development of the 2026 car. But what I don't want to be doing is finding out in 2026 that we have poor correlation between our simulation tools and what actually happens on track. So part of the aim for the development of the RB21, that's what we're on, isn't it?
I think we are. Yeah.
I always forget.
RB whatever.
Yeah. The 2025 car is just to check that if we see an improvement in our simulation tools, we actually see an improvement on the track as well. And they have shown that they are. And that must give them some confidence that actually their aero department and the tools they're using sync with each other. And that will have a tangible positive effect on their performance next season. And maybe that's what Ferrari needed to focus on, was maybe they lulled themselves into a false sense of security at the end of 2024, given how well they did and how well their mid-season upgrade did. That's important. That they felt that actually the correlation between what we're seeing in the wind tunnel and what we're seeing on track is good, and therefore we can allow ourselves the luxury of a change in philosophy. But it just hasn't worked out. So again, I can't blame them for doing it, but there's clearly an issue between what they're seeing back in Maranello, and what and how that relates to what happens on track. Any closing words on the technical side of
No,
things, Ammar?
I think you're right. I mean, this is all about not so much about the what and about the how and why, right? And that's kind of where we're at, right? And this is why there cannot be any confidence moving forward, right? I mean, again, if you are a Ferrari fan, you're looking around at your neighbors, or Mercedes fans, or Red Bull fans, and McLaren fans. You're seeing what they're doing has purpose to it. Of course, the results are what they are, and largely a lot of the results in Formula One are comparative, right? Like it's how you're doing compared to others, right? But you can see that there is a method, there is a process, there is some logical sense that when we're taking risks, they're gonna pay off in some way. Not always in big gains, but those little gains that Red Bull are making now towards the end of the season, I think bode really well for next year. And this is what worries me about Ferrari, because in essence, we are in 2025 where we were in 2021, which is Ferrari had probably packed it in maybe after the fourth race of the season or whatever. And they were supposed to show up with a contender in 2022 when they essentially had two years with the rule set prior to it going into existence, because of COVID and whatnot. But they couldn't show up with, they showed up with a car that was competitive, but couldn't develop it throughout the
Yeah,
season. And that's kind of, again, where the problem started is you have to kind of question when these things happen over and over
yeah,
again. Is like, what is laced within the Ferrari culture that does not allow for that to happen,
yeah,
even when someone like Fred Vasseur comes in,
yeah,
right?
but I think in 2022 they they fell foul of what everybody fell foul of. That everybody was seeing massive downforce in the wind tunnel and CFD, and then suddenly found that on track they were bouncing all over the place. And the only team that didn't do that was Red Bull, because Adrian Newey was like, hold on, we can't just chase
Yeah, but
peak
Shez,
downforce. But and I think everybody had that problem. It's just
I
that,
understand that, but this cannot be the excuse every time, right? I mean, it ceases to be an explanation and becomes an excuse when every time the thing is, and I have all these Fred Vasseur quotes that I'm sitting on, which is like always comparing it to the uncomparable, right? In cases where Red Bull has sort of blown the pack away, right? In 22, it's like, oh well, I'm sorry, only Red Bull got it right,
it's
nine
true
other
though,
teams
they
didn't,
did.
right? But I know they did, but that's not good enough as an excuse, right? I mean, you can't keep doing that stuff over and over again, as we're going to talk
I mean,
about later. But
Only
we'll kind of move on from
there's
here.
only
But
one Adrian Newey, unfortunately. I think
I
everyone
understand that
suffered from not
you're
having him.
seeing there's an Aston Martin fan on this podcast now. So
Yeah, I'm telling you. All right. Second thing is operational. Okay, so the operational side of Ferrari, and when I talk about operations, I'm talking about how they construct a weekend, how they address setup changes, how they use the time they have to to set to warm the tires up well on a out lap, um, how they go about their program of working in a Grand Prix weekend. This, I think, is where some of your quotes are going to be important. So operationally, how do you think Ferrari are doing?
I would say pretty poor,
Okay,
and it's borne
go.
out in all of these quotes, right? There's so I went back and looked at quotes from literally all the races, barring from Fred Vasseur, I should say, barring the Austrian Grand Prix where he was not available, he was off that weekend. And they read just exactly what you're describing, in that so there's a Monaco quote that makes a lot of sense. It's like he says something to the effect, on Thursday we have designed a car that's good enough to lead, and we're leading practices in P1 and P2, but today there was no way we managed to do P1. And that, by the way, is the only race that they could have actually won. I mean, looking back at how the season is gone, Monaco is the only race where they could have won. They got a P2, but it just feels like a loss, right? There's this quote from the Canadian Grand Prix. We made too many mistakes across the weekend. A one-stop strategy might have worked, but the real issue was execution, missing running in practice, quality error, and race problems. I mean, that there's nothing left after that. Like, what else is left? Like, I mean, this is just, it's stuff like this. And you know again, there's this sort of like, the target was podium in the Italian Grand Prix, but we fought very close, but we overheated our tires. We couldn't get a good qualifying lap. I mean, Okay, like, I mean, this is laced in throughout, right? Every single weekend, there has been some flavor of a mistake or mishap that has happened. And there hasn't been one weekend, Chaz, where you can say, ah, see, look at that. We got one perfect weekend, right? And I don't even know, to be honest, if that perfect weekend lends itself into a win or not. I mean, at this point, given what we just talked about, maybe the win is never on the cards, right? Because I mean, I think, the Dutch, sorry, the Hungarian Grand Prix is the perfect example of that, where Charles took pole and look where he finished. Like it didn't even matter. So yeah, I mean, it's just frustration, and I think the bigger issue is they don't seem to know what they need to do because they keep making a different flavor of the same mistake over and over again, right? I mean,
So, okay, so part of that is going to come back to the fact that they have a car that is uncompetitive, right? They
sure.
don't have the ultimate pace probably to be able to compete at the front week in week out. But I do find it interesting that this weekend especially, we started to hear a bit more from both the drivers. Charles especially was talking about the car being undrivable. That goes back to our processes in terms of the technical team. But Lewis was talking much more about things like smaller things that we think, but things that we might think are smaller, but things that probably have a much more tangible effect on how they can run a weekend. So he has said now on a few different weekends, he said it in Baku, he said it again in Singapore, that actually I felt pretty good in the car, and I thought that we would be able to compete for pole. Now, I don't know how much of that is hyperbole, but he then talked about specifics. So one of the things that he talked about in Singapore was we got to the end of the pit lane. Everybody has their own way of preparing their tyres on the outlap because every car has a specific set of needs. But we came out, we switched the car off, we sat there, we let the tyres cool down, and then there's no way that on the outlap there's enough time for us to warm up the tyres to do a balls out qualifying lap without ruining the tyres or taking life out the tyres by overheating them on the outlap. Whereas you look at what other teams are doing, like Mercedes, they started out before us, so they didn't wait for as long, and they were able to keep the performance in their tyre, and George Russell got a pole. So this is Lewis talking about the experience that he has of working in other teams, seeing what other teams are doing currently. And these are small sort of operational things that could Ferrari be optimizing the package that they have. It might not be a McLaren beater, but are they even getting the best potential out of that package on a race weekend? And I would argue no. And again, that comes down to my favorite word, process. Like, are you using the data that you have in front of you? Are you doing the tests that need to be done to get the answers you need to make your performance better on a race weekend? And I'd argue not.
Yeah, and I think the question is, do they not know
Yeah.
stuff like what Mercedes are doing and Red Bull are doing when quality comes, or do they not want to know? Like,
But I,
which one is it?
but
Is
I'm
it
I
is it
find
is it the
that
lack of desire, or
I,
is the lack of the ability to do that? Like,
I
and both are serious allegations, by the way.
I
So
find the former unbelievable, only because the movement of personnel between Formula One teams is so massive, right? This is like a big family with different rooms, and people, personnel, engineers, drivers, they move around from different teams all the time because they have expertise that is specialist to being in a Formula One team. So I find it unbelievable that Ferrari have no personnel from other teams that have seen what needs to be done operationally at a Grand Prix weekend, and don't then tell Ferrari how to, where they could improve. The most vocal person we have at the moment is Lewis Hamilton, but I cannot imagine that there aren't people in the background that are screaming their heads off silently, if nothing else, going, what the are we doing here?
So if that's the case in this particular one example of qualifying, right, in Singapore, right, then how many others are laced in? And then you have to sort of think about all these little missteps along the way add up to what, right? And so you're right, maybe Ferrari isn't a world championship car, but they could firmly be in P2, putting McLaren under pressure. McLaren are going through a bit of a, tough situation with the drivers. Who knows what that could have looked like if there was pressure from early on, right? You don't always have to build the outright fastest car to win a championship. And we've seen teams be able to kind of make their way through
I
it.
just think
But
we're even
to
talking about a
not be able to do
championship.
the
It's not
little
even.
things,
It's not. It's just about winning a
yeah,
race,
I
man.
mean,
But this is
and there's no
why. But this is why
exactly.
Formula One teams have a technical team back at base, and they have a race team at the circuit, and those two entities are supposed to talk to each other to be able to, the race team have to be able to say, look, this is what the drivers are saying on track, this is what we're finding, feed that back to the technical team, and the technical team vice versa are talking to the race team to say, look, this is what you need to do to optimize the package that we're giving you. But it seems to be that that level of nuance standing between those two entities isn't there. And you look at a team like Williams, right? Williams got a podium in Baku and are slowly working their way towards the front of the grid, and you can see that trajectory. They don't have a fast car, but they are able to optimize what they have every single weekend. Racing Bulls are another great example of that. They don't have a car that's going to win a championship, but they're able to maximize every weekend what they can do with that car because they understand what it needs. The drivers understand how to extract that performance and what tangible steps need to be taken. It's not just about, do you take do you brake earlier and turn in later for a particular corner. It's also about, okay, what is our program for prepping the tires on the outlap? All of these things are important in being able to maximize the performance of the car, the package that you have. You don't, as you say, have to have a world-beating car to still need to do that.
Yeah, I think my big takeaway from this is that Ferrari are too steeped in their own tradition and sort of their own way of doing things, in that sometimes their head
Yeah,
is in the sand. And
yeah,
this is
that's
what
true.
this means, right? Because if you are a world-class entity, you're not the one always innovating. You're actually integrating innovative practices that are happening across the field. That's what you're great at. It's not necessarily coming up with a new scientific solution to something. It's about piecing together things that work elsewhere, contextualizing it, and being able to apply it in a
100%.
way that works
100%.
consistently. And that's something that they're not able to
Yeah,
do.
100%
And the
agree with that.
reality is, the blame for a lot of this has to go to the two guys you just mentioned earlier, who walk in today or whatever it was, acting like they have some magic dust they're going to sprinkle all over the offices and in Maranello and elsewhere. Like, and that's just not how things happen, right? So again, funny enough, these are simple things, right? When people are not communicating, that's necessarily because they are frustrated, Ches. They're frustrated about whatever. They don't feel like they're working in harmony. They might even be demotivated. Not wanting to do this. Maybe just going through the flow, right? Who knows what internal communications look like in within Ferrari, and I think there is. It just shows. It just shows now. And again, Shaz, one of the things that I appreciate coming out of Mercedes is we've talked about this before, is they go back and do a race debrief and they do it in public. Now they're not giving
Yeah,
up all their
yeah,
secrets,
yeah,
but
yeah. I quite like
the
that.
very act of being able to do that out loud has great power in it, Chess, because unless you acknowledge that there's a problem, there's no way to fix it. And without communicating about it, you're not never going to acknowledge it, right? And to me, there's precious little proof that Ferrari is communicating this internally because of the way Fred speaks about these things externally. The way, if you
Yeah,
just
yeah.
read
I
through
agree with
his
that.
set of quotes, he is trying to be overprotective in a way that does not need to be overprotective. Now you can argue that's because people are going to get fired, and
Correct.
again, that's what put
Exactly.
it back on
There's that
the guys,
fear,
right?
isn't there? There's that fear that, like,
Correct.
my job's on the line. My
Correct.
my employees' jobs are on the line if we're
And
not
it shouldn't be
performing.
that.
Yeah.
right? You should be able to say, look, our technical department screwed up, or our strategy team sucked today, right? Whatever it is, because until you can acknowledge that, it has to be tough love, and that you cannot just be protecting feelings either, right? And I think that
Well,
the problem that they have right now is that even though Fred Vasseur comes from a different culture, I'm starting to get worried about him because he is acclimatizing to the Ferrari way as opposed to bringing his set of ideals, his set of philosophy. I have to believe that he's going to
profound.
want to do that. And so the question is he being held back? Is this pressure from these two guys? I mean, again, the very fact says that Elkan and Benedict and Vinia make this big deal about coming there and reported out by the outlets tells you everything you need to know. Like, what are they? There's some knights in shining armor that are going to come and solve the problem all of a sudden. Why are they doing that, by the way, right now, where there's still a quarter of a season left? Technically, 6 races left. That's a quarter of the season. What are they saying right now that they didn't know about before? And what are they going to say
Yeah.
that's going to change the next 6 races or next year? Like,
Yeah.
what is the point of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
That to me is also a bit of a. So imagine if you're one of the employees there and they're coming down and talking to you. What, you know everything that's going on. You know how much you're struggling. You don't need anyone else to come and tell you that, right? Why are they there?
Yeah.
This is, again, it goes back to a culture issue. Even though we can talk about X's and O's and technicalities, it sort of goes back to some of the basics.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we were going to move on to strategy, but I think, ultimately it comes down to the same thing. Some of the glaring errors that we see that where you're sitting on your sofa watching the Formula One and you go, why the hell did Ferrari do that? Or why did Lewis go out on mediums? Why did Charles go out on softs? Why did they do that stop? Why did they do it then? All of those things, when you're like, even I could have told you that was a silly thing to do. Again, comes down to process and how they're using the data. And sometimes you wonder if they have their data banks in front of them. They're not actually watching the race that's going on in front of them. And it's so weird to see it. But this form of Ferrari that I see right now is very different to Ferraris of the past. And I think I always go back to 2012. 2012 is a interesting season for me because I don't think that Ferrari had a particularly quick car that year, and Fernando Alonso was definitely fighting a rearguard action against what was a faster Red Bull. That's that's a fact. That Red Bull was a quicker car, but Ferrari were operationally and strategically perfect that year. Their pit stops were on point. Their strategy was great. They knew exactly how to get the absolute most out of whatever car they had at a given weekend. And that's what got them close to that driver's title that year, right? But Ferrari seem to have lost that. They seem to have lost in its entirety all of it. And at times over the past sort of 13 years or so, they've had points at which they've had a competitive car, but they haven't had the right operations. They've sometimes had mildly, competent strategy, but they've not had a car to exploit that. It's never the three things together, and I think until they have a root and branch analysis of why there's a lack of correlation, why there's a lack of understanding about how to use the data that they've got in front of them, and the answer to this is always just sack the person and bring in somebody new. Ferrari just aren't going to get any better. It's so frustrating to see it, Ammar, because from the outside, just as somebody that manages a team that has to do leadership roles, it's so frustrating to see that these glaring errors are there, that people are out there saying the things that need to be improved, but you just don't see anything happen. Instead, you just see the same old, let's just sack someone because that's got to be the answer.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this has got to change moving forward, and hopefully that's what the two top dogs at Ferrari told everyone. And they say, you're safe. Just let's try to move on. They probably said all the right things, right? Because that's what we would believe.
Indeed. All right. On that front,
right.
Let's call it a day. Ammar, thank you for getting up at a ridiculous clock.
Oh my God.
To me. Is it actually dark outside where you are?
No, it's pretty bright, but you know what? Next time we do this, I want to be out here streaking when Ferrari is securing the constructors and the drivers championship.
Nobody wants to
Probably
see that,
not.
Ammar, I'll be honest with you, man. Even in Malibu, where you live,
Not Malibu, but you know what?
close.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna do now. Thanks to everyone who joined us. There are quite a few people who joined. I was a little bit surprised.
Yeah,
and
definitely
positive.
appreciate that. Thank you for everyone in the comments. As usual, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We'll read every single one. We'll reply to as many as we possibly can, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Fix it, Fred.
Oh
Please.
God.